Hello, welcome to December. Well, folks, we're back, so grab a suitable holiday beverage, some festive snacks, and let's get to it. The New York Times. Some people love them, some people hate them, but they're undoubtedly one of the most influential outlets in the English-speaking world. And every holiday season, millions of people will head to the Wirecutter section to pick out the best vacuums, the best way to memorialize their pets, and in this case, the best board games. And this isn't some small potato operation. The Wirecutter drives like $1 billion in commerce. They're the authority on consumer products for millions of people. So today I wanted to explore something called the Gell-Mann Amnesia effect. It's this phenomenon where you read an article about something you're actually an expert in. Let's say you're a dairy expert reading about the best yogurts, and you notice it's full of errors. Oversimplifications, misunderstandings about the viscosity. They get the flavor profiles so wrong that you just start to froth at the mouth with dairy rage. And then you turn the page and read an article about the best vacuum or international trade policy, and you just trust it. You forget that 30 seconds ago they were completely wrong and butchered that dairy piece. So here's my question. Is the Wirecutter's board game advice actually good? And don't get me wrong, I respect the hustle. They played 150 games, they went to conventions, they talked to 11 experts, and they searched online forums. This isn't some 2013 BuzzFeed listicle thrown together by an intern who's only ever played Monopoly and Cards Against Humanity. But they forgot to consult one guy, me, a random guy with a camera and a microphone. So now you can add me onto the list. You're welcome, the Wirecutter. Because board games are my domain. This is an area where I have a modicum of expertise, and they're the one entering into my sweaty abode. If their judgment seems shallow here, what does that tell me about all those other articles that I trust? So each game is going to get on a tier list from S to D based on how good I think that game is for that specific criteria. So if they recommend TI4 as the best family game, I mean, yes, TI4 is great, but it's not a sane person's idea of a family game. Then at the end, I'll do some magic math and we'll calculate a final score. So let's find out if I'm about to lose all my faith in every Wirecutter recommendation I've ever trusted, or if they do manage to hold up to their reputation. Now, quick disclosure, this is all opinion. A board game recommendation isn't the same as reporting facts about climate change. I'm Gell-Mann in an opinion piece, not objective journalism. So let's all remember that classic game, Binkies, facts and opinions, and understand that I can't Gell-Mann an opinion the way you could objective facts. There's no objectively wrong answer to what the best board games are. But what I can do is evaluate whether the Wirecutter is making interesting choices, trendy choices, safe choices, or most sinful of all, boring choices. Whether they're showing deep expertise or just repackaging trendy opinions. Plus, it's always fun just ranking things. Also, you can check out the full list by clicking on the link in the description. I don't even think you need an account with the New York Times, so definitely take a look at all of their reasonings as well. Anyways, here we go. Best for beginners, Splendor and Seven Wonders. All right, let's start at the top with their beginner recommendations, Splendor and Seven Wonders. Now, this category is key because best for beginners can make or break someone's entire perception of games. Get this wrong and you've lost them forever. Let's start with Seven Wonders. I actually think this is a really excellent choice. It's a drafting game that scales well from 3 to 7 players, which is a Christmas miracle. There's also simultaneous play, so everyone is keeping engaged. And there's just enough asymmetry with those different wonders to keep people interested after multiple playthroughs. It has a sweet 3-act structure and a nice little feeling of building an engine, which is all extremely satisfying and good for beginner games. The Wirecutter specifically calls out that it's not divisive and it doesn't encourage board game night fights. And you know what? They're right. The hate drafting is hidden for the most part. You can mess with your neighbor by taking their card that they could have really used, but they don't necessarily know you did it on purpose. And it's actually really brilliant design for beginner gamers. Seven Wonders goes into S tier. It's one of the best beginner games that you could recommend. It's a very solid start. Anyways, I'm sure this winning streak continues and this video will be nothing but praise, right? Now, Splendor. I'm going to acknowledge a little dilemma right now, because if you love Splendor, you're about to Gell-Man me, because honestly, I'm not a Splendor fanatic. So you might be sitting there thinking this guy's work is trash. Splendor is the smooth jazz of board games. And hey, that's cool. Welcome to the thought experiment. It's Gell-Man and Turtles all the way down. But please, let me explain. The Wirecutter says, after we played Splendor with 3 new gamers, everyone requested it again. And yeah, sure, Splendor is fine, it's competent. The gem chips are satisfying to handle, the rules are simple. I can see how a new board gamer can completely and absolutely fall in love with it. But for me, it is without spark. Take gems, buy cards, get discounts, repeat. There's minimal drama, there's no narrative arc. It's mechanically sound enough to be satisfying, but not exciting enough to be great. The game never surprises you. It just asks you to be slightly more efficient than your opponent at accumulating resources. There's no moment where the engine feels like it's alive. There's no dramatic pivot. There's no moment of sheer ingenuity. It's all just a gentle upward curve of having slightly more purchasing power. It's an optimization puzzle without any of that kick that makes optimization exciting. It has minimal tension, no narrative. The game is both muted in interaction and in drama. There's always this gentle drone of brains clicking away at a puzzle, but I feel no joy. Overall, Splendor is a safe choice that will generally be fine, but it's just too much like an unflavored nutrient drink for me. It checks all the boxes, but it's missing that zest for life that I feel in other games. It goes to B tier. Best for 2 players, Hive and Star Realms. Let's start off with Hive. I'm ready for my daily penance, dear board game enthusiast. I've never clicked with Hive. I've played it about 20 times throughout my life. I tried the expansion bugs, and while I can appreciate the insane depth, I just can't find the joy in it. The Wirecutter describes it as having all of the tactical depth of chess, but none of the game's cultural expectations. And look, I get the appeal. It's portable and easy enough to teach. It has that chess-like feel, but there isn't that pressure of memorizing openings. But each game is this careful dance of insect placement, where you're maneuvering to trap your opponent's queen. It feels like one of those chess endgame puzzles, you know, where it's like white to move and mate in 4. And that's exactly my problem. Hive doesn't feel like a game to me, it feels like a test. The entire experience is circled around not making mistakes. It's less, what cool thing can I do, and more, which move doesn't immediately lose me this game. I feel like I'm being judged while playing it, because all of the exploration of the game mechanics feels like I'm walking on needles. And for most people, asking the best 2-player game, they don't want to feel like they're taking the LSAT with their spouse. They want some drama, some exploration. I want to feel like I'm experiencing something uniquely thrilling, and not something that feels strangely sterile. And I know, it's deep. I know it's got a strong community, but I never could click with it. It's just a bit too dry, its mechanics are too test-like, and I simply don't find it palatable for my taste. And it's not like I dislike abstracts. I think Tak is brilliant, I think Azul is peak design, but these games have a distinct flavor to them. But when I think about playing Hive, it feels like I'm eating really overcooked plain chicken breast. And even to the driest, most vindictive person who wants to bicker and argue with their spouse while playing a game, I'm still not going to recommend Hive when Patchwork is around. Hive, ultimately, it feels like a game that is made to be studied and not really played. I'm sorry guys, but Hive goes to D tier. Now, Star Realms. Star Realms is a deck builder in space. It takes that core Dominion formula, buy cards, build your decks, and adds on direct player conflict. You're building an engine to blow up your opponent in this frantic race for the best cards and the best combos. There's a lot to like with Star Realms. It was smart enough to keep the good from Dominion and add just a few little twists by focusing on this combat aspect, and also adds in a randomized trade row. But that engine building, that ramp up from accumulating trade to building up your arsenal, it's still immensely satisfying. But it's not the perfect version of what this game could be. The trade row sometimes feels a bit too random, the combat feels a bit stale, and while the deck building is solid, it doesn't hit those highs that newer releases bring to the table, or even the founding father of Dominion. Star Realms feels like a stepping stone. It's between the genius of Dominion and the polish of modern deck builders. It's not refined enough to be timeless, and it's not groundbreaking enough to be foundational. It's a game I played and enjoyed at the moment. But do I ever really think about it afterwards? Do I ever really say I really want to play Star Realms in particular over all of the other deck builders, over all of the other two-player games? It's not exceptional enough to be the definitive two-player recommendation from the Wirecutter. Star Realms goes into C tier. Truthfully, this whole two-player section was a miss for me. You might be a huge fan of these games, but I just can't see these two, Hive and Star Realm, as the recommendation to put above all other possibilities. The best card games: Cat in the Box and Skull. Cat in the Box is a trick-taking game with a quantum mechanics twist. You don't play suits until you actually play the card, mimicking that whole Schrodinger situation where cards exist in superposition until revealed. It's a very clever little puzzle. The core of it is that you're trying to manage what suits are still available, and it's a fascinating little dilemma that it gives to you. Plus that quantum theme, it's dialed down enough to be a cutesy, approachable level that works for almost everyone. But what lies underneath that cute, clever box is a devilishly sharp, trick-taking game. It's really about weighing your choices, aggressively closing options for your rivals, and finding a path to win tricks without creating a paradox that ruins you. Over the games I've played, I've seen many different approaches and strategies, and the game permeates its scientific theming by rewarding experimentation. Here's one caveat though, and maybe it's a big one. This is a very meta game. If you've never played trick-taking before, a lot of the mechanical creativity will be missed, and you might even find the theme and gameplay a bit abstruse. This isn't inherently a problem, but more that it might be a bit of a leap as an entry point into trick-taking. It might be easier to recommend something a bit simpler or maybe a bit more traditional. There are lots of good trick-taking games out there, so the options here are rather up to personal preference. All of that said, I still think Cat in the Box, it's a fantastic game, and it makes sense to put a trick-taking game on this list. So Cat in the Box goes into S tier. And Skull? Look, Skull, it's a great game. It's a game I've recommended many times. It creates tension with minimal components, and in my core, I respect it. But here's my real big issue. Is Skull actually a card game? I actually asked my subscribers this because I felt like I was losing my mind, and you guys were almost 50-50 on it. There was some good debate and arguments on both sides, but I think if push comes to shove, I'm gonna have to agree with Devalme, who put it perfectly. You could definitely make a convincing argument that a hot dog is a sandwich. But if I asked someone for a sandwich and they brought me a hot dog, I'd slap them. Obviously, no one's getting slapped over board game semantics, but the analogy holds. That's Skull. You could play it with coasters, you could play with rocks. I've talked about this in detail in a previous video, but the symbols of Skull could be anything, really. But if someone came up to me and was like, let's make a list of the best card games, what do you want on it? I would probably say something like Scout or The Crew, you know, something where it's all about shuffling, hand management, and the actual playing of cards. Skull is really a bluffing game that happens to use cards in its original format. And maybe this is a sick take, but just because a game only involves cards, it might not be a card game. Like, is Codenames a card game? Is Monikers a card game? Is The Resistance a card game? I feel like there are certain mechanics that are a component of card games that just isn't captured in Skull. That whole topic, I think, deserves a deep dive, but even the fact that I question if Skull is a card game is enough to raise doubts of its suitability for this category. Skull goes into D tier, not because it's bad, but because I think it's the wrong answer to the question. I've recommended Skull plenty of times before, but its credibility as a card game just hasn't convinced me. And hey, if you think Skull is obviously a card game, think of those Gell-Mann and turtles. We're gonna go all the way to the bottom of this turtle tower together. Okay, pal? The best strategy games: Brass, Birmingham, and Root. Okay, now we're going to the heavy hitters. The Wirecutter's picks for the best strategy games: Brass, Birmingham, and Root. Let's start with Brass. The Wirecutter calls it an economic masterpiece and a satisfying complex logistical puzzle of production and consumption. And you know what? I have to concede, they're absolutely right. Brass is without question one of the defining games of the past decade. It's the #1 game on Board Game Geek for a reason, And that reason is that we all love making pathways for moving small wooden cubes. Brass's economic engine is brilliant, the map is tight, and the way you can use other players' resources while simultaneously helping them, it's a masterstroke of player interaction. I also feel like the way that the deck is handled is an underappreciated act of genius design. There's this whole development on the board, and then you can actually feel the deck start to dwindle, and it just culminates in making some desperate plays to make sure all of your industries are successful. The Wirecutter nailed this one. Everyone I've introduced Brass has come away impressed. It's meaty, it's satisfying. I've had friends message me days after their first game, itching for another fix. And look, some might say it's a bit complicated, especially as an entry point, and also that theme of 1800s industrialization can feel dry to some people, but I disagree. Those are smaller concerns dwarfed by the super engaging mechanics. It's one of the most satisfying puzzles that's around. And in my experience, it's almost always a hit. Brass goes into S tier. I can't argue against peak. Now, Root. Root, my beloved. Root, my despised. The Wirecutter describes it as a devilishly tough and layered asymmetric wargame disguised as a fairy tale romp. They talk about how each faction feels like playing a different game, how the artwork is gorgeous, how it creates surprising interactions. And all of that is true. Root is brilliant. Root is one of the most interesting games of the modern era. But here's the thing the Wirecutter glosses over. Root is a nightmare to recommend, because Root is a game balanced on a knife's edge. When it works, it's magical. When it doesn't, and it often doesn't, it's absolutely misery. Root requires total buy-in from everyone at the table. You need a shared baseline of knowledge, of threat assessment. There are so many small rules that get missed, so many mechanics that are misunderstood. And without that foundation, the game feels utterly broken. Plus, you really need 4 players. Let me give you a classic example. Take the Vagabond. When you introduce the game, it's one of the most attractive factions for new players. The whole fantasy of this lone wanderer on a man-with-no-name journey, aiding and attacking as they see fit, it's a wonderful fantasy. But the reality? The rule checks become a cacophony of questions and constant gameplay errors. The game requires an experienced teacher who can explain not only the rules, but the dynamics of play. It requires players willing to police each other, to gang up on whoever's winning, to understand that this isn't a typical kind of Euro competitive game. And the Wirecutter does acknowledge this. They say playing and teaching a game of Root can feel a bit like teaching 4 separate games. But that's not a selling point. That's just not a selling point, the Wirecutter. If a friend asked me to recommend a strategy game, would I hand them Root? Brass, absolutely, but Root needs patience. Root needs a buy-in from the right group who's willing to suffer to get to those hidden juices of brilliance that lie underneath. For the vast majority of people looking for a strategy game, Root is going to be a mess. It will feel unbalanced and confusing. If you don't have the right player count or the knowledge to run the game, Root will be an experience that's unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. Let me give you a hypothetical. Someone might see this list and see that it plays 2 to 4 players. They buy it for date night. They pick the Vagabond and the Eerie, which is a valid combination according to the Learn How to Play book. And all of a sudden, nothing makes sense and the hype crumbles apart like a moldy box of Christmas cookies from 2007. I've talked about this before, but Root is a bait game. Of everything on this list, it has the most appealing description. It legitimately sounds fantastic. And it is fantastic for a very narrow, specific audience. And look, I don't hate Root. I've consistently played it for years. I have a dedicated group of die-hard Root fans. But as a general recommendation, for people looking for a good strategy game, I would have suggested dozens of other games first. So after all of my fussing and warnings, Root goes into C tier. It's a specialist game masquerading as a crowd pleaser. For some people, Root will be the best game they've ever played, but for most people who don't want to dedicate that time and effort, there are so many better options. The Wirecutter got Brass perfect, but Root reveals a problem. It feels like they just picked it because it looks the most enticing, just because it looks like the perfect game for their audience. But the reality is it's a bit of a jump into the deep end. Okay, family games. The Wirecutter picked Boop and Sushi Go. Starting with Boop. The Wirecutter frames it as next level tic-tac-toe, with kittens. You're trying to line up 3 kittens to level them up to cats, and then you need 3 cats in a row to win. The twist is every time you place a piece, it boops adjacent pieces 1 space away. And honestly, this is a pretty solid pick. Boop is adorable, yes, but it's also rather clever. It takes the core concept of tic-tac-toe, something every kid already knows, and adds a spatial puzzle element that makes it way more interesting. Adults can actually enjoy playing this, which is like the holy grail of kids games. It's undeniably fun turning kittens into cats, and then the little battlefield of cats pushing each other off this little tiny fabric piece of a board. It's all a very charming puzzle to solve. But I do have a quibble with it. It's strictly 2-player, which limits its family utility. You can't really pull it out at Thanksgiving with everyone around the table. It's more of a parent and kid game or a sibling rivalry game. I also think that the game might be a bit too simple, or maybe better described as a bit too plain to keep the attention of older kids for very long. Which is why I do feel inclined to mention there are kind of holiday-themed variants with newer mechanics. Like the spooky version, Boop, which is the same game, but with an extra ghost mechanic if you want to engage with it. Or if you're really feeling festive, there's Boop the Halls, but that one does have a fair bit more going on, so it's kind of a step up in complexity. Anyways, Boop is clever and well designed, but I do think there is that limited player count that's a bit of a detriment to it, and I do think it's a bit too plain of a game. Simply put, Boop just isn't flexible enough to meet the needs of most families, in my opinion. Boop goes into B tier. Now, Sushi Go. The Wirecutter calls it a rapid-fire pick-and-pass card game. It's accessible for younger kids, while remaining fun for older kids and adults. And yeah, Sushi Go is a modern classic. It's the gateway drafting game. It's been on every best family games list for the past decade. Sushi Go is basically perfect for what the Wirecutter is trying to do. It plays 2 to 5, it's super quick, it's cute, kids understand the theme, and it teaches card drafting the same way that 7 Wonders does, just simplified. It's always fun watching people try to stack dumplings or hunt for that third sashimi. There's also this light sense of tension that permeates the game in a very playful way. I do think that scoring could be a bit too heavy on the math side for younger kids, but I don't think it's beyond the realm of kids who know their times tables. In my own life, I've had a ton of people with families and kids say how much fun they had with Sushi Go, and how much the grandparents and youngsters both enjoyed it. And while it's probably not my personal first choice for a game night, it seems to have that magical attribute that draws people of all ages to it. And you know what? I can't argue with my own anecdotal evidence. So I suppose Sushi Go is the right recommendation. It's accessible, fun, scales well, and it will work for the vast majority of families who pick it up based on this article. Sushi Go goes into S tier. Next category, cooperative games. The Wirecutter picked Pandemic. And look, I get it. Pandemic is the cooperative game. It defined the modern co-op genre. It's been around since 2008, sold millions of copies, spawned a legacy version and multiple variants. It's the gold standard of co-op games. The Wirecutter calls it an intense cooperative game that challenges players' thinking. That is true. Pandemic is well designed, with a clever mechanism where those infection deck cards create this escalating tension. The difficulty scaling is good, the puzzle is satisfying. I even recommended it in a previous video of mine as the defining co-op game. The biggest hurdle is really the theme. Yes, we all lived through a pandemic. Yes, many people are tired of being reminded of it. But the game still works, the mechanics are still tight. And for some people, the theme is abstract enough that it doesn't feel like you're reliving 2020. And look, the way I see it, that core gameplay loop is solid. That whole idea of moving your pawn around a map and trying to be efficient with your cards. It's a kind of puzzle that brings people together without it being overwhelming. It really has defined cooperative games for 17 years, so you have to give it a little bit of respect. And honestly, for a general recommendation to an audience, Pandemic is still a really good call. It teaches so much about general board gaming habits, it's available everywhere, people have heard of it, and it delivers on what it promises. Could you recommend a more recent, more modernized cooperative game? For sure. But Pandemic is still extremely strong and delivers that promise of a cohesive cooperative game. Pandemic goes into A tier. The only blemish is I do feel like there's a thematic exhaustion in the general public, and I do think some of the more modern renditions are a stronger game overall. Still, a really solid cooperative game recommendation. The best party games, A Fake Artist Goes to New York and Wavelength. Now, A Fake Artist Goes to New York. This is a social deduction game where everyone draws one line at a time to collectively create a picture. Except one person doesn't know what they're supposed to be drawing. You have to signal that you know what the subject is without being so obvious that the fake artist can also figure it out. And look, I get the novelty of the concept. It's creative, it generates funny drawings, and it's a social deduction game with a twist. But I do have an issue with it. To me, it's not very good at the social deduction part or as a party game. The actual deduction part is weak. In a more focused deduction game, you're always building cases and trying to read people and all the accusations and all of the lies and the layers that exist within that social dilemma. The social deduction is the game in these kind of heavier social deduction games. In A Fake Artist Goes to New York, the deduction happens in about 30 seconds of finger pointing after the drawing is done, and the rest of the time you're just kind of drawing one line and passing the sheet. Compare this to something like Avalon, where the entire game people are engaged and are debating. A fake artist gives you one funny drawing and then a moment of, was it you? And then you reset. The ratio of waiting around and the downtime to actual engagement is off. It feels more like an activity. It's a side thing you can do while people are chatting or eating. And in my own experience, it's easy for people to become disengaged or not as captivated in the concept as you might think. I would rather play an actually mechanically strong social deduction game that keeps people interested in the puzzle being created. A Fake Artist goes into C tier. It's passable, but there are better social deduction games that are more interesting and maintain a stronger sense of engagement. Now, Wavelength. This is a game where you give clues on a spectrum, like wet to dry or ethical to eat to unethical to eat. And your team has to guess where on that spectrum your clue falls. The Wirecutter says it naturally leads to fun and sometimes controversial revelations that change what you thought you knew about them. And this is an absolutely fair assessment. Wavelength is excellent. It creates that party game bubble where you have intense things to say about how ethical almonds are to eat, or where hot dogs fall on the sandwich to not a sandwich spectrum. The physical dial and the mechanics and the way it just kind of pops out of the box, it's all satisfying and tactile to play with. And when the debates actually kick into high gear, it's funny and it's accessible, but it's also interesting enough that enthusiasts will get into it as well. I honestly can't think of many bad things about Wavelength. I would actually say it's one of my favorite party games of all time, and it works well in almost any situation and creates fun insight and plenty of good jokes. So yeah, Wavelength goes into S tier. This is one of the perfect party game recommendations. Next up, solo games. The Wirecutter picked Final Girl and Legacy of You. Final Girl. The Wirecutter describes it as a tense, meticulously themed puzzle that immerses you in the schlocky world of an 80s slasher movie. And honestly, I mostly agree. Final Girl really lives and dies on its horror movie theme. The VHS-style boxes are all episodic, and you have a large variety of monster scenarios to play with. With like 20 different boxes to choose from, you can have what's an incredibly varied and replayable system. You got aliens, the monsters from A Quiet Place, animatronics, a knockoff Terminator, Freddy Krueger. It's all there. You just gotta pick what flavor you like. Now, Final Girl. I think it delivers on its promise, and it captures the feeling of each respective horror premise with actual passion. Like, I was playing the Hellraiser, Hell to Pay version earlier, and it had an ever-shifting map and these afflictions that needed to be purged that added a lot of flavor to the core system. But a lot of fans will praise it as the modern pinnacle of thematic solo games, and I just don't see it at that level. The core gameplay loop does feel a bit random, or maybe the better word is swingy. The game wants to engage with you through moments of pleasant surprise, but also through moments of complete and utter failure, so that sense of tension will actually ramp up. A good chunk of the game is decided by dice rolls and draws, And look, I'm not saying you can't mitigate the RNG, and you can absolutely get good at the game. You can lay cards face down to build time, or you can discard cards to modify dice rolls, or from the many items and character abilities that improve your chances. The game wants you to find a path forwards, most of the time. But sometimes the game also just wants to ruin you. And that's important because it creates this sense of fear. You're always dreading that a bad series of events can just ruin your plans. So when I look at Final Girl in totality, I see more of a narrative engine, a game that's meant to be enjoyed no matter what the outcome is. And it's a good narrative engine, but I really have to be in the mood to chuck a ton of dice to get the most out of it. Now, one side note, and I'm not docking any points for this because I genuinely can't decide if this is a pro or a con, but is it just me, or does Final Girl feel like it has a DLC or kind of microtransaction issue? It's pretty rare that I get into cost-benefit analysis, so I'm not using this as a critique, but more of a general question. When I see it, it just sometimes seems like there isn't that much game in each episode of Final Girl. Sure, those VHS expansions, they're good, but for what feels like you should be paying $60 worth of content, you're going to be paying closer to like $120. On the other hand, you can really pick and choose what experiences and themes might be most engaging for you. So it's friendly in the sense that you only can pay for what you actually want to play with, to buy what actually interests you. Plus, there is a ton of cross-compatibility between sets, which is also great for variety. To be honest, I see both pros and cons for this kind of pricing model, and I would love to hear your thoughts in general. So anyways, let's go back. Overall, Final Girl, it's a game that delivers its promise of reliving your favorite horror stories. It's a game that can create memorable stories and has high peaks, but you have to be able to tolerate that innate RNG that runs all of its systems. Final Girl goes into A tier. It's a really strong recommendation. Just make sure you're going to need more than just the core box. Now, Legacy of You. This is a classic Euro game where you're building canals in ancient China to prevent flooding of your cozy little village. Now, the Wirecutter calls it thrilling and emphasizes the tension of deck cycling, and every time you reshuffle to get new cards, the flood and other problems will advance. And look, the Legacy of You, it's a fair game. The core tension is clever. You want to cycle your deck to access better cards, but doing so brings you closer to failure. But here's my issue. I think the Wirecutter is overselling the thrillingness of a game that is essentially a resource management game against a few different clocks. There's the ever-imposing flood that marches along whenever you refresh your deck, or the barbarians that can overrun your people. But really, these threats are a failure to act with efficiency. It's a staple of any classic Euro game. It's really, at its core, a conversion puzzle, and finding the right order of operations to combo your actions, it's a solved little puzzle once you get that down. And look, I enjoyed playing Legacy of You, but for some unshakable reason, I felt like game after game, I kept funneling towards the same solutions. Now, Legacy of You is a legacy game. It has a story, but it's also fully resettable, which I do appreciate. It even has some self-balancing mechanisms as you progress, so it's all a very thoughtful and well-designed little puzzle. The only thing is that you might need a dozen or so games to actually play through it all, and at that point, I didn't feel like the mechanics could hold my attention for that long. It's a game that needs a fair bit of commitment, but also feels like it has diminishing returns. It's kind of like a curse being both a legacy game that's solo, but isn't 100% fully committed to that one-and-done experience. Legacy of You goes into B tier. It's solid, but it's not the recommendation I would make for the best solo game. Oh, I almost forgot, the Wirecutter also recommended outdoor games, Ladder Toss and Lacuna. Now, Ladder Toss, look, I'm sure it's a perfectly fine game where you throw these bolas at ladders and try to score points, but it's not a board game, it's a lawn game, and I don't touch grass. So I'm not even putting Ladder Toss on my tier list because it doesn't belong on a board game guide. It belongs in a best backyard games, which, to be fair, the Wirecutter does have under 7 offline games we love for camping, brackets that are also great for the backyard. Lacuna, on the other hand, that is absolutely a board game. Even though it technically has a mat, it's a 2-player area of control game that comes in a tube with metal pieces and a rollable mat. You scatter wooden flowers and try to claim the majority of a color to ultimately try to get the most majorities of all the flower types. And it's a lovely game. It's easy to bring out and just puzzly enough in that abstract, cozy way to keep the gameplay interesting. I don't think it's the most mind-bendingly deep abstract out there, but as a simple game to chat over, it works beautifully. There is a bit of murkiness though, that I would say, and kind of a casualness to the game. It has players envision lines and find closest pieces, and while there is a handy ruler included, it's not one of those games where you should try to make sure everything was done 100% perfectly every time. It's more relaxed and kind of just embraces being in a state of whimsical competition. That said, they do put a picture in the article on the playmat that is on some grassy kind of field, and I hate to say it, but it looks really bumpy. And I think this might not be the best and most accurate representation of how to play the game. It does feel like a game you would play outside, maybe on a picnic table, but not so much on kind of like a bumpy, grassy field. Anyways, maybe that's just me nitpicking, but yeah, I wouldn't play on such bumpy terrain. Lacuna, it still goes to A tier. And lastly, the Wirecutter recommends the Mysterious Package Company for murder mystery experiences. And this puts me in a bit of a predicament. I've played this genre of game before, and I must admit it's really not for me. I don't think they're bad, I just don't have the appetite for this kind of game. It's a genre of game that exists somewhere between traditional board games and novels, and most of them center around a central mystery to solve, and trying to piece together clues to push forward a narrative. So here's my dilemma. The Wirecutter is probably right to recommend the Mysterious Package Company for people who want that immersive, almost theatrical experience. But I can't tier it fairly because I'm fundamentally not the person to speak about these kind of games. It feels a bit like a movie critic trying to review Broadway. They're absolutely adjacent, and there is this overlap between this style of narrative game and traditional board games. But it's not something I claim to have expertise in. So I can't honestly say that the Mysterious Package Company is the best of this genre. So, like Ladder Toss, I'm recusing myself. No tier for the Mysterious Package Company. Let's talk about what this really all actually means. Let's take the tier list I made and assign some arbitrary values to it all. S tier gets 1 point, A tier gets 0.75, B tier gets 0.5, C tier gets 0.25, and D gets 0. After we put this all together, the Wirecutter scored 9.5 out of 16 possible points. And again, I'm not going to count the Ladder Toss game and the Mysterious Package Company, so 9.5 out of 16, that comes out to 59%. Remember my tier system? If I apply that same math in that system to this entire list, the Wirecutter gets a B, maybe even a B+. Let's be generous and put it at the top of B tier. And heck, let me rearrange the entire list so it's a little bit more accurate. Okay, that looks better. Now, I know 59% sounds like a failing grade, but this is a subjective mass media journalism kind of article, so I'm grading on a curve. And on that curve, we're giving this list a B+. And a B+ actually sounds pretty good, right? That's respectable. And compared to other outlets, they're way ahead of the curve. But to me, here's what actually a B+ means. It's strong, but not exceptional. It's good, but not something I actively seek out. And that's exactly what this list is. It's adequate. It's fine. And they nailed some picks. Seven Wonders, Brass, Sushi Go, Wavelength. But they also recommended Root to kind of a general audience who'll find it confusing and broken. And I kind of still disagree that Skull is the definitive card game. They didn't recommend bad games. Every game on this list is defensible. But defensible isn't the same as best. And best is literally in the title of the article. Here's what bothers me. When I see the Wirecutter at the top of the article, I'm expecting and kind of assuming that I'm going to get exceptional expertise. The letterhead does a lot of the heavy lifting. The production value, the font, everything that's in this article, the fact that they consulted 11 experts. It creates this whole paratext of authority before I even read that first word. But once you remove the branding, what's left is a B+. A list that's competent, but not exceptional. A list that gives me fine recommendations when I thought I was going to be getting the best. And that leads me to an uncomfortable question. Every morning I listen to the Daily when I'm brushing my teeth. And when they explain the economy or the latest technology or international trade, I trust them. because they seem authoritative. They've done the research. But what if they're giving me the same B+ analysis there? What if I'm trusting the letterhead instead of the expertise? What if the yogurt that they recommend isn't the best yogurt? It's just a safe choice that won't generate complaints. It's mediocrity disguised as expertise. And in the same vein, what if their analysis isn't exceptional, but just consensus opinion wrapped in prestigious presentation? And look, I'm not saying the Times is wrong about all of these things. I genuinely don't know. I'm not an expert beyond my very narrow focuses in life. But that's exactly the point of this Gell-Mann Amnesia effect. We can pick apart the flaws when we have expertise, but when we're ignorant, we default to acceptance. And none of this is about catching them being wrong. You can't really be wrong about board game opinions anyway. It's about realizing that prestigious institutions can be merely adequate in ways that you'll never detect unless it's your domain. I picked the Wirecutter and the NYT specifically because I do see them better researched than other news sources. Like, seriously, look at some of these nightmare listicles that exist about board games in other major news publications. All things considered, I don't think this is a bad list. It's just when I read their articles about anything else, I don't have the ability to critique and dive into it like I can with this one particular niche. And to be 100% clear, good journalism matters. Investigative reporting, shining light in hidden corners of our existence, that stuff is essential. I'm not using a board game listicle to dismiss an entire realm of kind of professions. I think maybe it's just a matter of remaining vigilant and understanding that flaws can exist without our knowledge. And once you see this kind of happen in your area of expertise, it's kind of hard to kind of shake that feeling. It can make B+ tier advice feel like S tier analysis. And here's my final takeaway. The Wirecutter's board game guide is competent. It's a B+. If you know nothing about board games and generally want mainstream appealing recommendations, this list will probably serve you fine. But if you want to avoid pitfalls, root for the wrong group, high for couples who just want a chill night, it takes a very specific kind of nuance, not just someone repackaging trending choices with prestigious branding. And the question I ask is, am I trusting their expertise or am I trusting the letterhead? So that's it for me. Thank you, as always, for watching, and bye.